Lady and the Tramp was released in 1955 by Walt Disney Animation and is their 15th animated feature film, based on the 1945 Cosmopolitan magazine story Happy Dan the Cynical Dog. The story follows the romantic tale of a sheltered uptown Cocker Spaniel dog and a streetwise downtown mud. I've always been deeply fond of Lady and the Tramp and hold it in high regard among the Disney canon. I think it's one of the most gorgeous animated films ever put to screen and is filled with so many iconic moments that it easily gets stuck in your head, whether it's the images or the wonderful soundtrack. And this is one I never grew up with, but I wish I had. I first watched this film back in 2018 when I was doing my original watch through of all the Disney animated canon, and it was a real bright spot during the Silver Age films, and it's one that I've always had on my mind, similar to Cinderella, and it might even be one of the best films the Disney company has ever made. But before we get into all of my thoughts, let's do what we always do here and go behind the scenes to see just how this film was made. Story artist Joe Grant came up with an idea inspired by his English Springer Spaniel, Lady, and showed how she was shoved aside by his new baby. In 1937, he approached Walt Disney with sketches which he enjoyed and commissioned Grant to start story development on an animated feature at the time titled Lady. Through the rest of the 1930s and into the 40s, Joe Grant and other artists worked on the story, but Disney was not pleased with any of them and believed there was not enough action in the overall story. By 1945, though, Walt Disney had read the short story by Ward Green, Happy Dan the Cynical Dog, and thought the story would be improved if Lady fell in love with a cynical dog character like the one in the story, and thus the main thrust of the story of Lady and the Tramp began taking shape. For the film, they decided to keep the perspective mainly on the dogs, which is why Darling and Jim's faces are rarely shown, which was similar to what people saw in the Tom and Jerry cartoons. By 1949, Joe Grant had left the studio, but Disney still had his storymen pulling Grant's original drawings and story ideas to retool them, and by 1953, the story for the film finally began to take shape based on Grant's storyboards and the short story. Green would actually go on to even write a novelization of the film at the insistence of Disney 2 years prior to the film's release, and it's because of this that Joe Grant received no film credit for the finished film. Animation for the film was handled in a similar way to Bambi, with animators studying different breeds of dogs to capture both movement and personality. And most interestingly, the spaghetti eating scene from the film was almost cut from the movie by Walt Disney, and Frank Thomas, an animator of the film, animated the entire scene himself, being very upset with Disney's decision. After being so impressed, the scene was kept in, and one of the most famous scenes in the whole Disney canon was born. Mary Blair, who had worked previously on films like Cinderella, Alice in Wonderland, and Peter Pan, was supposed to provide background art like on those films. However, she left the studio to become a children's book illustrator in 1953, and so Claude Coates was appointed as the key background artist. The film was originally planned to be filmed in full frame aspect ratio like all the previous animated efforts, but with the growing interest of widescreen, Disney decided to animate the film in CinemaScope, which made Lady and the Tramp the first animated film to use the process. However, this posed several problems for the animators. With the expansion of space, it provided fewer close-ups and made it difficult for a single character to dominate the screen, and groups were spread out to make up for all the extra space. It proved to be a huge hurdle for animators to get over, and they had to reinvent many of their techniques. Problems also arose before the premiere, as not every theater had the capability of showing CinemaScope, and so two versions of the film were released, one in widescreen and one in 35mm. The score for the film was composed and conducted by Oliver Wallace and was the last Disney animated film the composer would work on. Peggy Lee would go on to write songs with Sonny Burke and even sing several of the songs in the film. Lady and the Tramp was released in theaters on June 22nd, 1955, and was reissued multiple times in theaters in 1962, 72, 80, 86, and most recently in 2013. During its initial release, however, the film polarized critics, claiming it wasn't one of Disney's best efforts, but it criticized how the CinemaScope magnified the animation to the point where flaws were more visible, and believed the artist's work was below the standards of other Disney films. However, on the opposite side, some critics found it to be a delight for children and adults, and the film made for an enjoyable film and one of the best Disney had made. Since then, the film has been reevaluated by critics who have deemed it as a classic Disney film and one of their greatest works, with the spaghetti scene becoming one of the most iconic scenes in the history of animation. At the time of its release, the film took in a higher box office draw than any of the Disney films since Snow White and earned $6.5 million in rentals. Since its release, though, it has gone on to make $187 million on a budget of $4 million, making it very successful in the years since its release. Now, with all of that out of the way, let's go into my thoughts on the film. Lady and the Tramp is a wonderful film. It's not based on any particular work of great literature. It's not based on a fairy tale. It is, however, based on one man's experiences with his own dog, the man who first devised the story for the film, Joe Grant. And it was based on, of all things, a story in a magazine. And yet, Lady and the Tramp still functions as if it were taken from a fairy tale or a work of great literature, and I think that's what makes it so timely. It's a mostly original tale, and despite Joe Grant never working on the final project after leaving Disney before the film was even completed, it does feel like a deeply personal story, and I feel like we haven't really seen that in a Disney film since the movies of the Golden Age. Lady and the Tramp is many things: a love story, an adventure film, and deals with themes that almost seem universal despite the protagonist being a dog. We start with Lady, a Cocker Spaniel who has a good life with her owners Jim Deere and Darling. She is their baby, and the one day her entire world turns upside down when the couple have a child of their own, and Lady slowly falls to the wayside with less attention placed on her. Grant came up with this story based on his own dog, who gained less attention after his child was born. And I think the film captures that sadness, playfulness, and the wonder of a dog that is just seeking attention and gratification from its owners. I also have to agree with Roger Ebert, who said that the opening sequence with Lady as a puppy is one of the greatest sequences the Disney company ever made. It manages to capture that feeling of getting a puppy and the way they just easily make their way into your hearts. Lady starts out having to sleep alone downstairs, crying and pouting and wanting to not be alone as Jim Deere yells at her to be quiet and go to bed, even barricading her in the room only for her to sneak out, get in bed, and there she remains. It's so simple and innocent, and by far my favorite portion of the film. In fact, I think the entire first half almost outshines much of what's in the second half, and it's filled with what made up Joe Grant's original story pitch, and everything with the Tramp is what was added when it was decided the story would be combined with the story Happy Dan the Cynical Dog. We go from Lady being top dog, seeing her as a small pup, and watching her grow and mature into Jim Deere and Darling's little pampered princess. And it's very delightful to watch and experience. But we also get to see the neglect she begins to experience when most of the attention is placed on the newborn baby in the family. But what's great about Lady is how she adapts. She doesn't get all the attention anymore, and though she's initially scared of the child, she has a feeling of wonder when she sees him and a need to protect and watch over him. And I think the film manages to conjure that beautiful protective spirit we see in The Best of Animals. But I think the Tramp serves as a great wake-up call for Lady. It's because of him we see what it's like to be a dog that doesn't have an owner, isn't pampered, and has to learn how to survive on their own, which opens Lady up to this new world that she never knew existed before. And it's not until Aunt Sarah arrives with her mischievous twin Siamese cats that she finally experiences that feeling of not being wanted as she flees her home and ends up on the streets. The film just does a great job of letting us experience life from two different perspectives, where Lady lives in luxury and the Tramp has to live day by day on the run from the dog catcher while scrambling for food from any of the nearby restaurants. I think that's why Lady and the Tramp still provides a great fairy tale aesthetic, despite not being based on anything of that nature. But it's just so magical in the way it tells its easy and breezy story. I think the magic of this film also comes from its animation, which I think is the studio's best work since Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, and a lot of this comes from the incredible use of CinemaScope. This movie looks so grand and larger than life, and the imagery on display provides beautiful, vibrant colors, and the hand-drawn animation is, to this day, still impressive, whether it's the fluent character animation or the luscious backgrounds. Lady and the Tramp takes full advantage of CinemaScope by providing a gorgeous image that makes you feel like you're watching something as grand as the epics that were coming out at the time, which was what CinemaScope was more or less made for. And it makes Lady and the Tramp and the film that would come out after this, Sleeping Beauty, stand out as some of the best visual works to come from the studio. It's also interesting how, due to the wider screen, the animators had to work hard on making sure they used up all the space they could, and despite lacking many of the close-up shots from earlier efforts, the film manages to feel intimate with its characters. The humans in particular are always shown in a wide frame, while the dogs are clumped together and you get more close-ups with them. I feel like this was done purposefully, as the film is told from the perspective of a dog's life, and so our point of view when looking at humans is always shown from a low angle, whereas when we look at the animals, it's always straight on. It's a nice use of perspective, and the rules of cinematography applied to animation just as much as they do to live action. If I had to point out another standout of the film, it would ultimately be the music. We can easily point to the Bella Notte scene. It's iconic and has become one of the most well-known Disney scenes, period, so I won't spend too much time dwelling on it. But something I want to bring up is the chorus. I feel like the chorus that opens up and bookends many of these older Disney films gets forgotten. But for me, they provide the mood and whimsical feeling of the Disney brand. And I think in the Silver Age, they might be some of the best music coming from these films. There's something so comforting about the soundtrack, and it's especially so in the film's final moments, that leaves you with a sense of wholesome, happy feelings of the comfort of one's own home. Lady and the Tramp is many things. It's a love story between a Cocker Spaniel and a mutt, and that portion is wonderfully told and simply romantic, but it's only a portion of the real story that the film is trying to tell. It's really about Lady coming into her own. She starts out with everything, loses that, comes to an understanding of the larger world around her, and returns to save the day in a heroic rescue of her owner's child from a rat. Lady is the heart and soul of the film, and it's her story being told, and she's the strongest aspect of it, which is why the Tramp portion, though necessary for us to understand the themes of this story, is ultimately not as strong as what came before. The first half of Lady and the Tramp feels so personal compared to what comes after, as the plot really begins to kick in, that I think some of the beauty in the first half becomes lost by the end. Lady and the Tramp is a fantastic film, and one of the best of the Silver Age. The animation is some of the best work from the Disney company, and I think the use of CinemaScope was a great gamble for the animation studio to take. Animation was made to be seen on the largest canvas possible, and Lady and the Tramp shines in that regard. It's a humorous, romantic, and cute film that has taken animal lovers by storm for generations, and the staying power of this film can still be felt today. I love Lady and the Tramp. I think it's a great film, but its second half sadly never matches the absolute wonder that's present in the film's first half. Still, it's worth every moment of your time, and it's a nice, quick, and breezy film that's paced so well that the hour and 15 minutes just fly by. It's one of the best films of this era and one of the best films the studio has ever put out in their 100 years. And with all that said, I'm going to give Lady and the Tramp an 8 out of 10. I wish that the second half could have captured my imagination the same way the first half did, because I would have rated this even higher then. But still, Lady and the Tramp is great and worth a watch solely for how personal it feels in its intimate first act, the beautiful music, and the animation combined with the epic drawl of CinemaScope makes the film worth seeing on a big screen where you can see all the wonderful details and artistry of one of the studio's best looking movies. Well, that's all I got for you. Thank you once again for watching, and as always, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to the channel, and stay positive.